Good evening. I have with me India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in a first media interaction to a private channel. Nirmala ji, thank you so much for giving us this exclusive interview. Once again, the first to Network 18. I would like to begin my first question, and I'd like to frame it in the context of the last 3 years. In the September of 2019, you did a deep corporate tax cut, setting the agenda for growth, if I may. The same year, you delivered a growth-oriented budget. You repeated a very good growth-oriented budget even last year. This year, everyone was expecting you to deliver a populist budget ahead of the 5 states going into election. What was going on in your mind this year when you were framing this budget?
Thanks for giving me this opportunity to explain a bit more about the budget. I think in the mind of the Prime Minister, there was never this doubt that this budget, drawing from certain policy prescriptions that we had laid out in the last, for an economy which is coming out of the pandemic and showing very good positive revival signs, we should unhesitatingly give more help and stimulus that is required so that the revival is sustainable and the revival is strong. And therefore, there was no doubt in our minds from the very initial stages of working on this budget that public investment in infrastructure, that is the capital expenditure for the government, should be kept up. Even last year, we had given a good solid increase in the capital expenditure of the government between 2021 and 21-22. Now this year, therefore, we wanted to continue that momentum and also take as much as it is required to help the states to also move forward with their infrastructure spending. So from the beginning, I think the clarity in the mind of the Prime Minister was growth. Growth has to be ensured, growth has to be sustained, and we have to lead it, because only by public expenditure on infrastructure building, we believe that the virtuous cycle will happen, and also there will be a crowding in effect for the private investments to come in. So there was never a doubt other than this.
The elections were not weighing on your mind?
No, actually we thought if the economy does well and if growth has attained that kind of a momentum, the multiplier effect, which because when you spend on infrastructure and when you do capital expenditure, for every rupee that you spend, approximately 2.95 is what you would get as a multiplier, as opposed to when you're giving money through revenue expenditure, you get less than 1 rupee for every rupee that you spend, something in the range of 0.95 or something. And therefore we thought it was important to have maximum multiplier effect, and that would have enough ripple in the economy whereby the well-being of the citizens will be attended to. So if that is happening, why would any other consideration come in, even with the elections on? Elections come and go, but the economy, particularly at this time, at this juncture, requires that strong support.
Nirmala ji, if you look at India, it is one of the bright spots in the global economy.
That's
Today,
right.
Our economy is expected to grow at 8.5% next year. The same number for China is 4.8%, Brazil 1.6%, Indonesia 5.6%. Do you think that an 8% plus kind of growth is sustainable over the next few years?
If things go the way they are going now, in that gradually all sectors come up and are on their toes. And why do I say this? I recognize that even now the hospitality and contact intensive sectors are still requiring support, and that's been provided for in the budget. So our understanding is, if even those sectors revive as much as they would like to, and with support from government and with support from the systems, banking and others, yes, that is achievable.
You know, this time one big headline of your budget has been this big capex boost. You also referred to it just a little while ago. Allocation of 7.5 lakh crore. Right. You know, that's a big number, up 35% from last year. Do you think that this will fire up private investments? If that happens, you know, it could change the face of the economy. Are you confident of that?
I'm hopeful of that, because you see, I'm looking at it from slightly different stages and also environments. In 2019, for instance, when we brought in the reduction in the corporate tax and brought it down to such level which was globally probably the lowest, or probably one of the few lowest rates, we that year were sort of reminded, saying your corporate tax revenues have gone down, you saw it's not going to help and so on. But we had this great faith, and Prime Minister's interaction with the industry also was very reassuring, because people felt that that was a very positive, constructive steps. And what did it do? Actually, many of the industries, many of the big companies who actually generate wealth and create also jobs, so you saw them per media reports leveraging it, probably cleaning up their debts and so on. But that providentially has come of help during the pandemic time, that today you find many of them moving into areas of expanding their capacity. Mergers are happening, acquisitions are happening. You see that companies are out there to be able to expand their capacities, looking at the buoyant Indian market. And also exports are growing, which means export potential is also there for private sector investments to see the opportunity available, and expansion, and also newer capacities are definitely going to come in. The last point on that is, you also see, in spite of all the naysayers, FDI into this country, in spite of all the speculation about other central banking authorities taking different call, whether it is the Fed or anywhere else, FDIs are still coming into this country in a big way. They are not FPIs.
Yes.
FDIs come in to be invested in, to be on the boards of companies and then take a call. And therefore, I think companies now are happy to be partnering with a lot of FDIs which are coming in, and increasing their manufacturing capacities, servicing capacities, not just to serve Indian market, but also be able to access global markets. And our PLI scheme also indicates that.
Yes. You know, Nirmala ji, if you look at the actual spending from capex allocation so far in the first 8 months of this year, it is at 50% of the allocation of 5.5 lakh crore. Now you increase that to 7.5 lakh crore next year. How confident are you that the spending will keep pace with the allocation?
First of all, this year has been, yes, we had made an allocation till December, you are right, 65 to 68% has been utilized by the departments for spending on public infrastructure. But after the budget was announced, let's not forget that we had Omicron, the second wave, not even Omicron, second wave in April. And although we came out of it, thank God for that, although we came out of it quickly, it also staggered that first quarter's expenditure into the second, into the third, and so on. So reaching 68 in spite of the first quarter April and a bit of May going in because of the second wave and the psychological imprint it left on people, for us to catch up with the intended public expenditure did have a lag effect. So I would think that shouldn't be the case this coming year. now that Omicron also is showing signs of withdrawing. I don't want to say it's gone away, we'll have to be careful, but still.
Nirmala ji, you've addressed the supply side of the issue. I come to now the demand side. The big issue is how do we really revive demand? So you've got your large capital expenditure program chalked out. Could you have considered cutting taxes to put more money into the hands of the consumer?
There are ways in which demand creation can happen. In our country, where the taxpayers' number and also the taxpayers' profile is seen, then you also realize that it is possible to provide stability in tax regime, predictability in tax regime, and that I would think is a very important factor at a time like this. You don't want to bring in elements of uncertainty, and as a result of which some sections feeling, oh, all right, I've got some relief, but some other sections feeling that hadn't come to us. And probably this would have a bearing on many others. Any exemption given is also just not for those who desperately need it, but by law would be applicable for others who probably don't need it so much, but because the system and the framing is such that it'll benefit everybody. Yes. So that is one point. And second, if you're looking at tax stability, if you're looking at predictability and making sure that you have not increased anybody's burden, you're at least making sure that people who have planned their monies can be sure that that is remaining unaffected. Right. So we in this budget placed a lot of emphasis on stability and predictability. I'm no cricket watcher, but I would definitely say this from my outsider's understanding. Particularly in a T20 match, it will be the opening batsman can have the liberty to smash hit and do a lot of good sort of risk-taking batting, and probably the end overs the fellows would have to catch up, doing as much as they can because they'll have to meet the target and the gap which has to be filled. But there is a sweat toil happening which is in between the two. Yeah. You can probably take that situation.
I must say your cricket understanding is quite decent.
Thank you.
No, I think predictability, stability, I would even say continuity. I think that's been the hallmark of your last three budgets, as I have closely seen it. Right. Let me come to something that is a niggling issue, a global headache in some senses, inflation. Look at the US, for instance. Our consumer inflation has obviously stayed in the 4 to 6% range. But if that were to really go up in the coming years, do you think that could throw some kind of a spanner in the works?
I think globally all economies are worried about inflation. And that's not to say, okay, so what? Does it affect your planning or not? It does affect my planning. I'm only trying to say this inflation, particularly because of certain global factors of metals being very highly priced, energy, at least the fossil fuel being very expensive, the production being cut down, the cartel or cartelization of those who are fixing the prices, or all that is having a bearing on all over the world and certainly on us as well. Yes. And we also have realized that we are at a stage where we are making a transition towards climate friendly steps, yes, moving out of fossil fuel, and at this time we probably even, like many countries, want to look at gas coming in, natural gas coming in to replace many of what was dependent on fossil fuel. But at this time, with international natural gas price also going up, you're facing a situation where you're planning for something at a transitional stage, and that also is now going to be dearer. And as a result, your planning is also getting adjusted as we go along to look at giving more incentives for electric vehicles. And so the long and short of it is, yes, we are conscious of inflation. The global price going up on essential goods, particularly those which are important for industry. And within India, essential goods, for instance, are pulses and are edible oils, both of which still depend on a lot of imports. Our capacities are still not growing in oilseed production. We are not producing enough pulses for this country as much as we consume. So we will have to get them from outside. And therefore simultaneously increasing, we have given some incentives for, or we have a scheme through which oilseed production will be encouraged, but still even then we have to keep importing oil, crude edible oil or refined edible oil. And the countries which do export this do understand that India is a very big consumer.
I'll come to oil in just a moment. Just before that, the Fed Reserve has indicated raising interest rates this year. The US Fed Reserve's balance sheet is also likely to shrink as a part of quantitative tightening. All this will dramatically impact, sharply reduce global liquidity. What will be the impact on the Indian economy and our markets?
Well, I think if I can be fair in saying, since last 6 months, the Reserve Bank has been very keenly watching, and also the fora, the international fora in which both the Reserve Bank and Ministry of Finance meet with the international leaders, whether it is the G20, whether it is the World Bank, IMF meet. We've all been closely in discussion with countries to understand how this is going to play out. The lessons learned from the taper tantrum of 2000, post-2009 crisis, taper tantrum of 12-13, the lessons learned out of that are very fresh in our mind. So we are being sure that none of that will happen. We wouldn't leave all doors open like the way it was done earlier. We are watchful, and we should make all necessary steps progressively leading towards it, so that our economy remains protected to that extent.
Some reports I read, they think that you are a risk taker. This was a budget where you've taken significant risks. You agree with that assessment?
I'm glad to know, because earlier I thought the commentary was, no, this team is not yet, and I'm glad Honorable PM referred to it yesterday, saying that this very team about which there was this very critical observation that they can't deliver. I'm not saying I have delivered, but we are very clearly working towards making sure that Indian economy rises from this trouble. So, well, if I'm a risk taker, good enough.
Yeah, that's your humility, what you say. I'll come to oil prices, which you just touched upon. So, with the oil prices at 90 a barrel and with the Ukraine situation that we are aware of, do you think this will put a strain on fiscal management? And if I take the question forward, what is your 3 to 5 year roadmap on fiscal consolidation?
I think we've recognized and reiterated in this budget that the fiscal roadmap which was given in the last year's budget is something which we respect. And in spite of this year being again a challenge for our consolidation measures, because the focus being on growth, we had to do this kind of spending and this kind of borrowing, but still we've kept it fairly aligned with what we have given last year.
Yes.
And we continue to commit ourselves for that kind of the glide path that we've given in the last budget.
So you are confident that over the next 3 to 5 years you will be able to rein it in as...
Yes, because partly you also see that revenue buoyancy is improved.
Yes.
People might keep commenting on non-tax revenues, not adequate is happening, or even for that matter talking about tax to GDP ratio, that the tax base is not widening. I'm very glad to say that the ministry, particularly both the CBDT and the CBIC, are working very gently towards widening the tax base. All this will help me to have a bit more fiscal room to operate.
Okay. I think that the Air India privatization was a big achievement for this government. I think Neelachal Ispat has also finally found a buyer, But of course, ye dil mange more. So what exactly are you planning to do with BPCL? Are you hopeful that it will get done this year, in the next year? And what about others like the Shipping Corporation of India and BEML?
As I said in this budget, if you would have noticed, since right up front I've said that I'm underlining the continuity of messages and policy prescriptions mentioned in the last budget. I continue with that. So I actually don't think it's necessary for me to list out everything that I listed out last time, but my commitment to it continues. Air India was a particularly complex subject, and in that too, to keep the transparency at every stage, to be completely compliant in terms of all the diligences that had to be done. It took quite a lot of working together with a lot of people, and that's how it should be, because we are accountable. And therefore, what I would suggest is my commitment remains, it continues, and I shall take things forward even on that account.
If I may just ask you a little bit about the LIC IPO. What exactly is the status of that?
It's going fine. It will happen.
Okay, and this year, do you,
I think the schedule is, yes, it should happen this year itself.
And how much are you planning to divest, and what is the valuation? Some benchmark?
We'll announce it at a time.
Okay, but it will happen this year, and the money will come in this year.
Yes.
Okay, that's great news. Having said all this, I think with Air India privatization happening, LIC, as you've just pointed out, the one thing I want to ask the Finance Minister is, why is your disinvestment target so low? Just 65,000 crore for next year. That you could probably get, a chunk of it could come just from BPCL.
I fully understand. Like the many other things about the budget, there was a time when people said, why is your disinvestment target so high? It's unrealistic. And you're right in asking me, why is it so low? It's a question of, I suppose, recognizing disinvestment will have to happen with all the process, and also the question of timing your disinvestment. I've also been asked why during the COVID, stock market has been performing very well. This is the best time, you should have done it. It could be, but it's not just the stock market which decides on a public asset to be disinvested. There are so many other factors.
Yes.
I have to take everybody on board and move. So certainly these are things which, to be accountable, we mention it in the budget. To be accountable at every point in time, we have to answer questions of the media about it. But it also involves a lot of working together and taking a lot of people together and moving forward. So naturally, it does consume time.
No, in many ways, there have been many budgets in the past that I have been tracking. Always the disinvestment figure is a fancy number, and you don't end up achieving it. So in that sense, of course, a conservative number is always good. Yeah. But I thought, since you had such successes behind you, it looked like. But I suppose it's better to be conservative from your point of view. The other big headline, and everyone is wanting more from you on that, is the digital currency by RBI. When is it likely to happen? Some details that you could share at this point?
When is it likely to happen is something which I can only answer by saying one word: sooner rather than later. Because once it goes through the Parliament, I've just placed it there, it has to get cleared, and post that the RBI will move forward to take the cabinet approval and then go ahead with issuing the digital rupee, I suppose. So it should happen sooner.
And it will have a new name, different name?
Well, we don't know yet. Oh. That's some call which subsequently the cabinet has to take up.
Okay. Finance Minister, one more thing that is, the economists are talking about. They feel that you have underestimated your tax revenue for the next year. And why? I think it also stems from the fact that even in FY 2022, you revised it from 15.45 lakh crore to about 17.65 lakh crore. So do you think that there is a merit in this argument that the tax collections actually could be, tax revenue could be actually much more next year, and there is an underestimation of some
More than merit, I would hope for it.
Yeah.
I would hope for it, but because it's a matter of hope, I can't really already guess it in advance and put it as I'm sure about it. It can't be sure. I can't be sure about it. I hope, and the indicators show that yes, there is room for it to be revised, but I'll hold my guard on it.
You'd rather err on the side of sort of caution and
Absolutely.
conservatism.
I think finance is an area where being conservative is not wrong.
Right.
I think being conservative, not too much, but being conservative is also being responsible.
Yes. You know what I could pick up from the Secretary's conversations on television last night, is it some kind of a cushion to cut fuel excise in the coming days with oil at $90 a barrel? Is that something weighing on your mind?
I don't know whether if it is oil, meaning fuel. There are always elements of surprises through a year when you're dealing with the country's finances. Look at the past year. One of the big surprises, or one of the big thing on which we didn't want the end consumer, who were the farmers in this case,
Yes.
to be affected. You saw the way in which the urea prices went up. Went up unbelievably high, and we are an import dependent country, particularly when you wanted some of these very important urea matters, some of the phosphates and so on. You had to import them at that price, but that price couldn't be shifted to the farmer. End of the day, the farmer shouldn't be burdened by it, and therefore not only you're importing it at a higher price, but you're also making sure that price is upon you rather than upon the farmer.